Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Now, we're starting a new series today. Now, this series isn't for the lighthearted. Some of the episodes will probably hold some pretty bad memories for some teams, and some pretty fond memories for other teams. I've watched teams have their years end on the last day of the season. NLCS Game 7 from 2006 is always a tough watch. Sorry for not giving a warning before this one. I've watched lineups get no hit by pretty much nobodies. I mean, seriously, we got no hit by Chris Heston. So there's a pretty sizable roster I can make up of guys that I call season enders. Guys that were either team killers for long periods of time or had one special performance on a day where I really needed them not to. If you have any ideas for future installments of this series, as always, leave a comment down below because I'm always eager to hear what you guys have to say. I have a lot of Mets suggestions, but I'd like to cover other teams too. The first episode of this series takes us all the way back to the year 2007, which I'm sure brings back harsh memories for Mets fans everywhere. Most of you probably know the story of the 2007 Mets and their epic collapse. They began September with a 7-game lead with 17 games to go, only to have their whole division lead fall apart by season's end. The big catalyst that most people remember was Tom Glavine's implosion on the last day of the season, where he didn't make it out of the first inning against the Florida Marlins, and the Mets were out of the game before it barely even started. This allowed the Phillies to creep back in and win the NL East, furthering their run of division dominance for the next few years. But there was a game that came before this that was odd in its placement and served as a domino effect for the events that came after. Because of a rainout earlier in the year in June, the Cardinals came to town out of nowhere in the middle of September and sent somebody to the mound that nobody would consider an ace by any means. But to do this episode, I'm going to need a little bit of help from a friend of mine. I'll pass it off to him now.
For those who don't know, the Mets had a painful collapse out of the division lead, holding a 7-game edge with 17 to play and going 5-12 down the stretch to fall out of the postseason entirely and begin the Phillies' run of dominance. This video isn't about that fateful Marlins series or even the National series before that. It's about a game that unfortunately should have been played earlier in the season but was rescheduled. Before we get started, I have to introduce myself because I know this is a different voice than you're used to and I can't replace the sheer greatness that is Jolly Olive. I'm Tyler Gallo. I'm a member of the Stranded Sports crew. We make a lot of baseball content over there, and I'm the MLB editor for both the blog and any videos we put out, so I would really appreciate if you guys could go check us out. For some reason, I've always held some disdain for pitcher Joel Piñeiro in my head, and I could never remember why. Maybe he made my dad angry around the 2007 era, and I just followed suit, or maybe it was his red glove going out there as he dominated the Mets. I wasn't sure why this happened until I stumbled across a game from 2009. Piñeiro was pitching for the Cardinals and shutting out the Mets, and on that SNY telecast, they showed clips from a game from 2007 where he carried a shutout into the 8th inning, 3 hitting the Mets, which was a carbon copy of that game in 2009. Piñeiro had a solid career in the major leagues, pitching to a 4.41 ERA and recording over 100 wins, and my random Piñeiro disdain finally had a reason. He put it all together for one start during a bad season just to stick it to the Mets even more. Before we get into the game itself, we first have to mention how opposite the seasons were for both Joel Piñeiro and the New York Mets. For starters, Piñeiro wasn't even on the Cardinals at the beginning of the 2007 season, and the Mets weren't in the position that they were, falling out of the division race for the whole season. Piñeiro began the season with the Boston Red Sox pitching out of the bullpen, despite starting for the Seattle Mariners for his entire career up to that point. He pitched to a 2.79 ERA in April before his ERA ballooned to 5.14 at the end of May and was still over 5 at the end of June and July. The Red Sox had seen enough, dealing him to the St. Louis Cardinals, where he joined a staff that needed help. Piñeiro went from the future World Series champion to a team with a World Series hangover where he rejoined the starting staff and pitched solidly. Even though the Cardinals had already been eliminated by the time of this game and had seemingly got all its whipping of the Mets out of the way in the postseason the year prior, they still had one trick left up their sleeve in 2007. The Mets, on the other hand, had a pretty tumultuous 2007 season but were firmly in first in September, at least initially. Riding an MVP caliber season from David Wright and a renaissance at age 40 from Moises Alou, who returned from injury in time for September, the potent offense outweighed the shaky pitching staff, especially a bullpen where no lead could be trusted. By September 27th, they had just come off a brutal series sweep to the Nationals where, despite Moises Alou extending his hitting streak to 30 games in the third game, the team allowed 9 runs or more in all 3 games of the series. This game should never have occurred on this date if not for the weather. Piñeiro wasn't even on the team when the game was originally scheduled. It was supposed to be a matchup between Mike Pelfrey and Adam Wainwright on June 28th, but that never happened as rain postponed the game. They decided on a mutual off day in late September, which presumably would have been by the time the Mets had already clinched the division. The Mets and Cardinals had played some truly epic games in the past year or so. I'm thinking about the Beltran walk-off game or any in the 2006 postseason. However, this was not one of those games, at least for the Mets. Piñeiro took the mound for his final start of the 2007 season for the eliminated St. Louis Cardinals. His rough season hadn't got much better with the move, coming off a game where he lost after allowing 3 runs in 5 2/3 innings against Houston. While he had picked up 4 wins in the process, he had just 1 game above a 70 game score, and it was reasonable to say that another mediocre performance was expected from him. He was opposed by Pedro Martinez, who had missed most of the season due to injury. Martinez, who recorded his 3,000th strikeout earlier in the month against Cincinnati, had pitched solidly in his 4 prior starts and was poised to finally pitch in the postseason with the Mets after missing it in 2006 due to another injury. A good start here could shelve all injury concerns heading into October. Skip Schumacher of Rally Squirrel fame drove in a run with a single in the opening inning, and that proved to be all Piñeiro needed in this game as he pitched the best game of the season for him to that point. All the Mets could manage were a pair of singles, a walk, and a double as Piñeiro shoved over 8 innings, and the 3 runs the Cardinals scored against Martinez stood as the difference. Piñeiro struck out 6, including Jose Reyes twice and Carlos Delgado once. Weak contact was generated against him all night as the Mets had 1 player in scoring position the whole game. Piñeiro's final line: 8 innings pitched, 3 hits, 6 strikeouts, 1 walk, 0 earned runs, 93 pitches, and an 81 game score. For him, it was his best game in terms of game score since the 2003 season, so it was a long time coming for a performance like that.
It was an absolute gut punch of a loss, and as you may know, the Mets never really recovered from that, dropping 2 of 3 to the Marlins in their next series, which was soul-crushing. 3-run loss of Game 1 and the poor opening inning by Tom Glavine in the 3rd game officially eliminated the Mets from postseason contention, needing just 1 more win to clinch the division. Unfortunately for the Mets, one of Joel Piñeiro's best games of his career just had to come when they were in a free fall, and it further buried them headed into their final series. 2 years later, Piñeiro did it again to the Mets, pitching a shutout on June 23, 2009, with an 83 game score to boot. Now, to close things out, I'll offer you one question. What if Mother Nature was kind to the Mets on June 28, 2007? Maybe they get that extra win, get into the postseason, and the Joel Piñeiro game never happens. In a cruel twist of fate, we may never know if that was the case.
And so, the 2007 Mets did not make the postseason on the last day of the season, and they would miss the postseason again in 2008 after leading the division in September. And Pedro Martinez never really shedded his injury label as a New York Met, and his best days were never remembered in Queens. We also never got this potential matchup that was supposed to happen on June 28th between Mike Pelfrey and Adam Wainwright. Now, I'm not suggesting that the game would have went different. Wainwright had dominated the Mets in the postseason the year before, but had bad regular season numbers against them. And Mike Pelfrey was coming back from an injury, so his numbers on the season, which weren't good, might have improved in this game. We'll never know, because the game got rained out and pushed all the way to September. And if we want to dive into even more hypotheticals, the Mets were a better team in every facet on that day in June. Better offensively, better on the pitching staff, a better win-loss record, and 5-1 against the Cardinals to that date on the year. So it's not like they had a playoff hangover against them. They were ready to play. But none of this really matters, because the game got pushed, and when they did end up playing, the Mets didn't show up. I truly believe these 2007 and 2008 Mets never really played up to their potential, and I think it all started with that Joel Piñeiro game. I think he stole their heart, and if not for that season ender, they might have just made the playoffs that year. And that'll do it for the first episode of our new series here. As always, if you enjoyed today's video, make sure you leave a like and a comment down below, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. Speaking of support, I just launched my Patreon. For those who don't know, Patreon is a monthly subscription service where you can support me in exchange for some bonus content that I have to offer. This includes Q&A, video suggestion boards, some out-of-the-park baseball gameplay, and the biggest offering, which is me doing player deep dives from about 2 to 4 minute videos of any player of your choosing. I thought this would be a good idea since half the comments I get on my videos are, you should talk about this guy or this guy. So if any of that sounds like something interesting to you, make sure you click the link in the description to go check out the Patreon. As always, thank you guys for supporting the channel, but that'll do it for today's video. I'm the Jolly Olive, and I'll see you guys next time.